Welcome to the Backlash at Backlash.com. My name is Rod Van Mecklin, and in this video I'm going to read excerpts from Part 6 in my series on rape, Causes of Rape. Starting with second wave feminist Susan Brown Miller's book, Against Our Will, feminists have made several specious generalizations about rape, and so I wrote several chapters in my first book to address some of them. Here is the sixth of them, the full text of which is linked below with the sources cited. 1992, Bellevue, Washington, Causes of Rape. Identifying the cause of a problem, as most of us know, is half the solution. To prevent rape, we need to know what causes someone to rape. For feminists, there is one simple answer. Only men rape. Only men are the problem. Therefore, the solution is to control men. It should be obvious, however, that like all bigoted viewpoints, this oversimplifies both the problem and the solution. The causes of rape are many. Ignoring them is like attempting to control an infestation of rodents by building a better mousetrap. Catching more mice is only part of the answer. Understanding the conditions that allow them to reproduce in greater numbers and then eradicating or controlling those conditions is the rest of it. The same is true of rape. Catch the criminals, punish the crime, but also understand the root of the problem and change the conditions that lead to criminal behavior, like the crime Susan Brown Miller dubbed date rape. Lust as a cause of rape. Feminists dismiss the idea sexual passion can be a motive for rape. They believe it is impossible for any woman to provoke an overpowering libidinal response in some men. What if the tables were turned? There are many colognes for men, for example, manufacturers claim are laced with the male pheromone that will put women in the mood. Suppose a man bathed in a particularly strong solution of it, and the instant he set foot outside his door, women from miles around rushed to ravish him. Would they be guilty of rape, or would they be innocent by reason of drug-induced insanity? Some drugs work by mimicking the action of hormones. Morphine, for example, is similar to our own natural endorphins. Like drugs, hormones can have a profound effect on our perceptions and behavior. PMS exemplifies this. Oh, I can hear the feminists shrieking sexism now, but sorry, ladies, this is true. PMS exemplifies this. If women's monthly cycle can cause mood swings ranging from suicidal depression to murderous rage, then should we be surprised to discover what most people throughout history have known all along, that the testosterone-driven male libido can sometimes flare out of control? Women who wear clothes that accentuate their female attributes are bypassing men's civilized veneer to communicate directly to the male libido. We are, after all, visually oriented. At this point, feminists are screeching about blaming the victim, but they're just hate mongers and we pay too much attention to them. Usually, no harm is done because most men have discipline, but some things like alcohol or women's provocative behaviors can erode men's resistance. And sometimes, not very often, rarely in fact, contrary to what feminists claim, that can lead to rape. Why don't feminists get this? Well, I think they do. I think they're a bunch of lying hate mongers. But continuing here, because a reasonable woman would not be aroused by the same things that arouse men. Because a reasonable woman would not be aroused by the same things that arouse men? That was a question, actually. Because they would not perceive a female rape victim's clothing or behavior as provocative? Well, I say hogwash on that. For generations before the second wave feminism had their way with our culture and third wave feminists emerged. And even still today, you'll find women who will look at another woman dressed provocatively and call her a hussy. Why? Because they know provocative clothing. In the precedent-setting case of Ellison versus Brady, a reasonable woman perspective was established as the new standard for determining whether or not a woman has been sexually harassed. Feminists hailed this as a great legal victory because it opened the door for men to be judged in a court of law according to whatever perspective feminists could persuade judges and legislatures to accept as common to most women. The corollary to this, however, which they seem to have missed, is that this means women will be judged according to the now uniquely male reasonable man standard once men catch on to the fact and begin using it. Note, the reasonable woman standard is now almost 25 years old, and still men who are subject to sexual harassment continue to make their claims using only what feminists would call harassment rather than applying male standards, which is really sad because the Fifth Circuit, when they heard Ellison versus Brady and established the precedent, they explicitly stated that the decision also created a uniquely male reasonable man standard. Continuing, would a reasonable man feel a woman was subjecting him to undue sexual provocation with her dress, perfume, or behavior? Many men might say yes. Women and men are influenced by different things. Just as a woman would be unlikely to respond to a female sex pheromone-laced perfume where a man would, so a reasonable man could perceive certain behaviors and clothing of women as provocative and precipitant, where a reasonable woman would not. Precipitant behavior, by the way, is defined as behavior of the victim which contributed to the commission of the crime. Wait for the feminist to howl sexism. See Against Our Will, Men, Women, and Rape by Susan Brownmiller, where she talks about that. At least in the version I read many years ago. Maybe there's an updated version where she took those things out. I hadn't thought of that. To insist men are wrong about what constitutes provocative female dress and behavior is to deny the validity of both the reasonable victim standard and the masculine experience. Feminists, of course, would probably answer so. That's tantamount to saying only the female perspective matters and only men are responsible. Feminists would probably say yes, so. Well, they're bigots, of course. Economic causes of rape. Women have their price, and whether in marriage or prostitution, men usually have to pay. The going price of women in the modern meat market is determined by how much the average guy must earn before women will take the initiative, approach him, and ask for dates and sexual affection. This is the base average dollar value women place on their love and sex. During the past several years, women's expectations have risen in step with advertisements in everything from Ms. Magazine during the 70s and 80s to Cosmopolitan Magazine. But Mr. Average is still making an average wage, and reported rapes are on the increase. Are women's rising expectations causing this? Remember, this was 1992. Since then, of course, reported rapes have gone down, despite the false accusations. When prices, that is, female expectations, rise to the point where a significant number of men cannot afford the ticket to women's hearts, the incidence of rape increases too. Quote, there had been 2 famous mass outbreaks of rape in Gussieland, or is that Gussieland, once in 1937 and once in 1950. Robert Levine, an anthropologist from Northwestern University, investigated and discovered that in both years the price of a bride had soared beyond the reach of Gussie young men. Close quote. Wait for the feminists to screech sexism. That was from Susan Brownmiller, Against Our Will. Widespread economic fluctuations are not the only causes of rape in this context. Within any given community, poor men are far more likely to rape than middle-class and successful men. These days, of course, feminists claim that, oh no, anybody can rape you. Your husband, wealthy people. Yeah, right. Somebody else had something to say about that. Quote, surveys of the socioeconomic status of rapists in the United States indicate that the vast majority of offenders come from lower socioeconomic classes and are unemployed or unskilled laborers with only an elementary school education or less. Cross-cultural studies from Denmark and Australia also confirm that unskilled, unemployed, and poorly educated males, those who lose out in sexual competition, are more often rapists than other men. The data suggests that rich men rarely rape and that rapist and victim most often live in the same neighborhood, 82%. According to one study, a female living in the inner city stands a 1 in 77 chance of being raped in her lifetime. In more affluent areas, the risk becomes 1 in 2,000, and in a rich neighborhood, she stands a 1 in 10,000 chance of being raped. Wait for the howls of protest from feminists. Who said that? Mary Batten, sexual strategies. Consequently, to the extent women objectify, let's start over again, to the extent that women objectify men as success objects, they may contribute to the problem of rape. Rape and the masculine protest. During the 1950s, it was common for professional women to exaggerate their female attributes. At that time, it was politically correct to question the femininity of professional women. Why aren't they housewives? Why weren't they raising children and standing by their men? In defense, they wore frilly blouses and flouncy hats with one clear message, quote, "Let nobody question our femininity," close quote. Betty Friedan, The Feminine Mystique. The tables are now turned. Under the sustained assault of the feminist misandristic messages, many men feel compelled to create a false and exaggerated masculine identity through the creation of a subculture that, as George Gilder noted in, I think it was Men and Marriage, all but worships violence and machismo. Brown-Miller agreed, emphasizing that, quote, "social injustice is one of the root causes of the subculture of violence," close quote. What are men doing within that subculture, says Brown-Miller, quote, "They are desperately trying to learn the ways to be successful men," close quote. Attacked by the press, crucified by the politically correct gospel of intolerance, alienated by male bashing, and disenfranchised by growing social injustice, men are and were and still are targets for feminism's true believers. Extremists, the true believers, leave men few humane outlets for expressing their masculinity. Consequently, cinematic violence and lurid pornographic sequences in mainstream movies featuring hyper-masculine men abound. Of course, these days, you get pornography easily on the web, and hyper-masculine men in violent situations. Well, yeah, it's still in the movies, but it's also in games. Vicarious violence and silver screen sex cannot replace healthy masculinity. Nor can bulging muscles, flashy cars, and other expressions of the modern masculine protest. That's not to, by the way, condemn men who like that sort of stuff. I still like Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. Well, that's what we call him, Arnold Schwarzenegger. And oh heck, what are the movies that Sly Stallone does these days? The Replaceables or whatever it's called. I enjoy those. Those are a lot of fun. But there's more. Those sorts of things are just fine for men who have already have established a healthy masculine identity. But for fellows who have been just pilloried and destroyed by feminists, which thank goodness I went to grade school and public school before the politically correct feminism took hold. And I did have a few good male role models to follow and to model myself after. But I can only imagine what it's like now. I work with women who tell me that it's just absolutely horrible that their sons are just treated very badly. Anyway, continuing. Ultimately, they fail because they are not real, but they do serve a purpose, providing hope to men who buy into the idea that if they just do these things, they will be loved and lovable as men. An increasing number of men, however, have lost or are losing hope. Some flee to religion, others to drink, drugs, and self-destruction, but how many turn to violence and rape in a desperate attempt to prove their masculinity? Rape as an expression of disempowerment. Years ago, and I wrote this in 1992, so it's even more years ago now, it was popular to say criminals are victims of society, maladjusted women and men needing only sympathy, psychotherapy, and kindness to put them back on their feet. Since then, it has been so well proven that disempowerment is not the end-all be-all of criminal behavior that, when men are the perpetrators or the accused, many reflexively reject the idea. But its application to women is still popular, as the legal concept of battered woman syndrome proves. Note, as detailed in his book Manslaughter, by Stephen England, the battered woman syndrome was established as a legal defense in the precedent-setting case of Jennifer Patry. Ironically, England concluded reluctantly that Patry was anything but a battered woman. Regardless, disempowerment is not the sole cause of rape. Realistically, however, it is a contributing factor. During the past few decades, most men have suffered both social and legal disempowerment as a direct result of the socially extensive and politically correct male bashing. Not coincidentally, there has been a tremendous upsurge, at least at that time, in incidents of rape and attempted rapes. Do the facts confirm a connection? Are rapists really disempowered men? Yes, many are. Brown Miller's statistical portrait of the common rapist compellingly demonstrates this. In 1973, the period from which she took her statistics, a time in American history when most young men were just beginning the long climb out of the defeat and disillusionment of the Vietnam conflict, the typical rapist was between the ages of 16 and 24. Now, on other channels, some people speak very disparagingly of baby boomers. In one of my earlier videos, I said that, yeah, the baby boom generation is to blame, but then so are all the other generations, because every generation has a whole bunch of stupid people and not so bright people. But yeah, it wasn't all flowers and free love and drugs for the baby boom. Remember, we had the Vietnam conflict. According to Brown Miller, despite that black men comprised less than 1/16 of the general population, according to the FBI, she pointed out that almost 1/2 of all rapists were black. This at a time when many were hearing for the first time about the sexual disempowerment of black men. Eldridge Cleaver touched on this in his classic book, Soul on Ice. Quote, "All of our lives, we've had the white woman dangled before our eyes like a carrot on a stick before a donkey. Look, but don't touch," close quote. Expressing his torment, he concluded, quote, "I became a rapist," close quote. Honest, guys, it wasn't an easy time to be young. 18 years old in 1971, I remember well the turbulence of the time. My male friends and I expected to go to Vietnam and die. I didn't, by the way. My elder cousin did, and he came back a very changed man. Many did go. Some did die. But the war wasn't the only issue. Feminism and the Black Civil Rights Movement also filled the news. Being American Indian, I was less subject to accusations of racism than other men I knew, yet because of my fair skin, I received my share of hostility and guilt-mongering from feminists and civil rights activists. As men, we were all uncertain of our identity, our sexuality, and our future. When the hippie ethic, with its exhortation to practice free love, and fell into popular disfavor, and thousands of tortured men returned from Vietnam, what did it mean to be a man? For many, it was a time of profound confusion and frustration. I would also point out that when I was in grade school, and lasting, golly, for decades, clear until the Reagan administration, we were living under the threat of nuclear annihilation. Remember, mutually assured destruction, MAD? When I was in grade school, every Wednesday at noon, the local air raid siren would go off, and we had to crawl under our desks as if that would protect us from a nuclear holocaust. Social programming. For many, it was a time of profound confusion and frustration. As Sherhite noted in her book, Women in Love, such disempowerment can cause a person to become, quote, terroristic, close quote. For a few, that becomes the only way they can express their feelings of frustration and purposelessness. Quote, "The typical American perpetrator of forcible rape is little more than an aggressive, hostile youth," close quote. Wait for the feminists to howl protest? Susan Brown Miller, Against Our Will. If the typical perpetrators are disempowered young men, then the obvious answer to at least a part of the problem is to empower young men. Validate their masculinity, provide them with ethical and constructive outlets for expressing that masculinity, and they will rape less and contribute more. This will work because We know this will work because in many traditional cultures it has already long been demonstrated to work. Feminists, of course, absolutely disagree, but then they're hate mongers. We shouldn't pay any attention to them. As with so many things that are true, empowerment is only a part of the answer because there are other reasons why men rape. Not the least among them being that millions of women idolize heroic rapists. And I'll cover that topic in part 7 of my series on rape. That's all for now. Check out the other videos, subscribe to the channel. For the Backlash at Backlash.com, my name is Rod Van Mechelen.